So hello everyone. At first I want to thank the organizers for this great workshop. I think it's a really cool platform with lots of interdisciplinary work, and I think it's a really cool place to have it here. And my name is Sarah. I did my PhD actually in biological psychology and investigated the brain with EEG. And nowadays, for about 2 years, I think I'm working now on artificial neural networks and how they can be improved by taking some inspiration from the human cognition. So yes, and today I want to show you some work of ours which investigated whether fostering compositionality in RNNs can help to solve the Omniglot challenge. So let's start with compositionality and how it is included with how efficient learning lives from compositionality. So if we show a child a picture of a bird and tell it it's a bird, then the child can easily decompose this bird into its parts and knows that there are wings and a beak and these bird feet and so on. And so if it sees other birds, it can easily recognize them as birds as well. The child can even invent totally new birds, and this is all very easy for a child, but for algorithms, this is quite hard. As we all know, the machine learning algorithms nowadays need lots of samples, and they are not really good at efficient learning. And there is a challenge that investigates such efficiency differences between humans and machines, and this is called Omniglot challenge. It was Lake and colleagues provided this challenge. It consists of several tasks, all related to handwritten characters. I will present you them briefly. The first task is to regenerate a character in a one-shot manner. The second task is to generate new variants of a provided concept, also in a one-shot manner. The third task is a one-shot classification. So was this character already part of previously shown characters? And the fourth task is the generation of totally new concepts. So algorithms or participants get these characters and are then asked to invent totally new characters that could be part of the provided alphabet, even though they aren't actually. And usually if one wants to solve these tasks with algorithms, they have to be very specialized and have lots of strong handcrafted priors. So what do I mean by strong handcrafted priors? For example, Lake and colleagues gave their model the motor primitives that are necessary to compose the characters in the end. So the model got the information that there exist like half circles or straight lines and so on. And we asked ourselves, okay, is a generative LSTM network maybe even able to extract such components on its own, and then later on able to rearrange those components so that it can, in a one-shot manner, regenerate characters and even variants of the characters and so on. So that's what we wanted to investigate. Is a generative LSTM network able to extract those components and use them? But let's have first a look at the data set, because the original sequential Omniglot data set has several flaws. So first of all, it was collected via Amazon Mechanical Turk, and the participants traced pictures instead of writing the characters freely. So they had images in front of them and had to trace them. And this was done with a computer mouse and not with a normal pen, like you would write a letter. And this led to unusually drawn characters, as you can see here. For example, the different colors are the different strokes, so in different orders. So red was always the first stroke and green the second one. And as you can see here, for example, for this A, they used like 3 strokes. And if you would write an A, you would probably only take 1 or maybe 2 strokes. And also for the betas or for every character, actually, you can see this. So it's like an unnatural writing style. And if it was an alphabet which the participants didn't know, like here, for example, the Japanese alphabet, then you can see that the order of those strokes is even more varied. So yeah, they start the characters in many different settings, and this is of course not how Japanese people would write it. So they have order in which they write the different strokes. So there are several flaws involved here. Furthermore, one can also say that there's not much variance in it. So for example, there are not script and there are not different variants of an A, for example, but only the print letters here. So these are all problems that we found with the sequential original Omniglot data set, and this is why we collected an own data set, and we collected 440 letters. They were naturally drawn and only consisted of the Latin alphabet, because we wanted the participants to be experts of the alphabet, and they were drawn on a touch-sensitive tablet, so not with a computer mouse. And then we did the training on these 440 variants, but only on the first half of the Latin alphabet, and the second half of the Latin alphabet was then used for those 1 and few shot tasks of the Omniglot challenge. And how did we do this? So our model was a very simple LSTM model. It consisted of an embedding layer and an LSTM layer, and out of one hot encoded inputs, which just encoded the character, the model generated at every time step the difference in X and Y positions of the pen. And with this, we got a trajectory in the end. And we trained it, as I said, on A to M, on the first half of the Latin alphabet. And then for the one-shot tasks, we provided a so-called one-shot inference mechanism, which you can see here in blue. It's very simple. It's just the fact that they were provided with N to Z, but the model was not able to train everything, but only the first weights into the first embedding layer. So everything else remained constant. The LSTM layer remained untouched. Just those first weights into the embedding layer were able to be adapted. And this is because we thought that if it's really able, the network, to extract components during the training on A to M, they should be represented in the LSTM layer probably. And then with an adaptation of the first weights into the first embedding layer, the network might be able to rearrange those components that it had extracted during A to M when it's confronted with an N, for example, then. So for the one-shot tasks, that was our thought behind it. And this is how we trained it. And then I want to show you the results for the different tasks. So at first, of course, the regeneration, which you can see here in blue, is the original character set of the handwritten of humans. And then we have the generated ones in black. And you can see that this worked very well. We tested then if this one-shot inference mechanism might also work with an untrained model. So there was no training on A to M, just the adaptation of the first weights into the first feed-forward layer. And as you can see here, this didn't work. So this speaks a bit for our hypothesis that this training is necessary to extract components, and then the network can later on, with the one-shot inference mechanism, really rearrange those components in order to regenerate the characters, the new characters, in a one-shot manner. We were also able to generate variants of those characters. So if we added some noise to the one hot encoded inputs, we were able to generate variants, as you can see here. So there are different sets and different letters of all kinds. We also managed to tackle the task of the one-shot classification. Here you can see that the one hot encoded input was then adapted. So it got a new P, for example, and then we did not train the network again, but we adapted really the input. So no weight adaptation, but we adapted the input, which was for the classification at every point we had the one divided by 26 because of the 26 letters. And yeah, with this adaptation, in the end, we got not really a one hot encoded input, but an input which encoded the correct character. Here, for example, you can see that the P is the most brightest here. Yes, and this worked very well for very similar variants like these. Of course, if we showed the network very different characters, this was way harder for it. But if you look at the Omniglot data set, then again, you can see that the characters are very similar. So yeah, it's not really the case that you have totally different characters and it has to classify them as well. And the future generation of new concepts also worked well. And we did this by mixing up or blending two different letters. So in the one hot encoded input, here we have the one hot encodings, and here we have like 50-50 of a Q and an N. And with this, we got a blending between two letters. Here you can see at the bottom, for example, like something like a Greek letter, even though our network had never seen Greek letters. So this means that they are quite plausible. Here is also a video of the blending between two characters, which shows quite nicely that it's like a smooth blending, also speaking for our compositionality hypothesis. But of course, until now, we can say, okay, the task worked quite well, but is it really compositionality that helps us solve the Omniglot challenge? We cannot really be sure about it. So we wanted to investigate that a bit further. And this is why we investigated we looked at the hidden and cell states of the LSTM cells, because we thought that the components might be represented there. So let's have a look. Here you can see a W, and as you all notice, of course, is a W consists of like a repetition of a component. So it's 2 times something very similar. And here you can see the cell states and the hidden states. On the x-axis, we have the time steps, and on the y-axis, the 100 dimensions of our LSTM units. And as you can see, we have like a repetition in the cell states as well in the pattern here, or also here you can see this pattern is kind of repeated. But of course, this is just like visually analyzed, and we cannot be completely sure about it, but this gave us some hints. So what we did was we wanted to analyze this more systematically, and therefore we used a t-SNE analysis of those hidden states, and we projected those 100 dimensions at every time step on a 2-dimensional space, because this is what t-SNE does, and with this we can interpret the results more easily. So let's look at those results. Here on the left-hand side, you can see the cell states. Let's look at them first, maybe. They are you have the different colors, which represent different characters. And then we have like the time steps here as well. And what you can see is that the cell states are clearly clustered per character. And this might be an indicator for the network to really stay in the correct attractor. And this might be necessary because if you look at the hidden states, here clear character components can be identified. So this is a way different picture. We don't have the time steps here, but the black lines represent the corresponding trajectory parts, and the cross always marks the beginning of such a trajectory part. So as you can see here, for example, the trajectory parts that go from bottom left to top right, like a stroke, a line, they are represented next to each other, or similar curves are represented next to each other, and so on. So it seems like the hidden states really have these character components that are identified there, and therefore probably it needs the cell states to remind it, like you're drawing an N and you're still drawing an N, and you take another component but you're still drawing an N, something like this. Furthermore, it's also interesting that, for example, if this is just an example, but if you look at the Q and the Y, you can see that in the middle they are very similar, their trajectory. And this is why they lie here next to each other. So Q is the green one and this is the Y. And they lie next to each other because they are very similar here, and then they diverge because in the end we have like a half circle here for the Y, but not for the Q. So this is why they diverge. And yeah, with this we think that there really seems to be some evidence for our hypothesis. So let's have a look at our first experiment. What can we conclude here? So the Omniglot challenge was met with a simple generative LSTM model without providing it with motor primitives. And during our training on A2M, the model really seemed to learn components that it can later on recombine when it's confronted with totally new characters. And we think that we have shown that these compositional structures develop in the hidden states of the LSTM cells. And with our one-shot inference mechanism, which you can see here again, so adapting the blue weights here, this recombination is made possible. So this is our conclusion from experiment 1, but then you can, of course, say, yeah, but what about the original Omniglot data set, because we have not used it so far. And of course, there are some flaws, but we wanted to test it anyways on this data set as well, which is why we did our second experiment. And here we trained the network on the first half of several different alphabets, always only on one of them, and then tested it on the second half of the alphabets. And the results can be seen here, and they look very promising as well, even though the Omniglot dataset has several flaws and is not so is not so much variance in it, but our network seemed to be able to use the components that it got during training again in order to regenerate totally new characters than in the one-shot tasks. What we wanted to test then in a second small experiment was, what if we tested on the Balinese alphabet always, but train the network on different alphabets? So here at first you see the second half of the Balinese alphabet, which worked very well. And here you can see the Balinese alphabet when it was trained on the Burmese alphabet. And also here you can see that it regenerated the characters in a nice way. But then we thought, if it got presented with the Latin or Greek alphabet, it shouldn't be able to regenerate those in such a good manner, because the alphabets are very different. And this means that they don't share all the components that are necessary in order to generate Balinese characters. And actually, this is exactly what we found. So for training on the Latin alphabet, the results looked worse on the Balinese alphabet, and even more so for a training on the Greek alphabet. And yeah, this is like a further, this is what we expected if our hypothesis was true. And so we can conclude that the Omniglot challenge was met with our simple LSTM model, and that it was even so for the Omniglot dataset. And we found lots of evidence for our hypothesis that fostering compositionality really facilitates efficient learning. And we hope that this is like a small step towards bringing specific machine learning architectures towards closer resemblance to human cognitive mechanisms. And I think the time is over, so thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions now.